Okay, being recorded.
Okay, so welcome everyone. And we're doing the second installment today of Catherine's seminars on German New Medicine. So the first introduction to German New Medicine is available on her YouTube channel, which is Carpridge Eco Wellness Center YouTube channel. So you can watch that if you're new to it completely, and we'll go kind of slow so that we'll have that beginner mindset with German New Medicine today. So we're going to be running this with people on mute, and throughout the seminar, if you have any questions, if you could just type them in the chat window. So if you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, you should see something that says chat. You can click on that and type in your question. And that way, at the end of the seminar, we can run through those questions and make sure everybody has their questions answered. And what we're going to be doing now is a little short meditation to get us sort of centered and grounded. And I'll be just playing a little bit of sound for that. I'm a sound healer here in Ottawa. And if sound healing is something that interests you, you can reach out to me to learn more about that too. Catherine, is there anything else I need to cover before we do the sound?
One more thing, because we're recording, make sure that everything you say is something you're comfortable with being recorded for the future. Thank you.
Yes, good point. Okay. Catherine, did you want to say anything for the meditation piece?
Yeah, it's something that we do before most of our events and meetings to calm the mind and open to receiving new information.
All right. So with that, we can just get calm, centered, focused on the breath, letting go of the day, becoming present, and enjoying a wee bit of sound.
That was lovely. Thank you. All right, so we'll move into introductions. Briefly to introduce myself, I'm a naturopathic doctor and took my training in Portland, Oregon at the National College of Naturopathic Medicine. I think it's now university, and graduated in 1983 and wrote my board exams in Ontario. I've been practicing here, and now I run the Eco Wellness Center in rural Ottawa. And the center is on 190 acres, beautiful country on the Carp Ridge. And it has a holistic clinic with various practitioners, massage, emotional healing, Reiki, naturopathic medicine, and we work together with patients and we integrate German New Medicine. We also have an organic bed and breakfast, organic beds, organic food, turn the Wi-Fi off at night, and people can come and stay and get a full assessment, which then they take home, and we try to find practitioners for people to work with at home. And we also run programs such as meditation, yoga. We have a group. So once a month, we run a group for $20 where people can come as naturopathic patients and ask questions about their condition. And we practice healing techniques together. Last time we went out to the garden and did a meditation and picked herbs and smudged ourselves with the herbs from the land. So it's all quite lovely. And we're moving towards doing earthing practices on the land. So having places where people can come and lie in the earth and be protected and soak up earth energy. So it's all a lot of fun. The overview of this talk, we're going to review German New Medicine basics, and then we're going to explain how German New Medicine views allergies, and then the complementary understanding and treatment of allergies in naturopathic medicine, because I'm not a German New Medicine specialist. I still depend a lot on my teacher and mentor, Ilse-Dora Laker. So I'm more of a naturopathic general practitioner. So I use these together. And then we'll move into diet and detoxification recommendations from German New Medicine standpoint, naturopathic medicine, and Ayurveda. We'll throw in some case examples all along. We'll talk about resources. Rebecca will host question and answer and take us through a final chime meditation and medicine. So that's what we hope to accomplish in the next hour and a half. Okay, so let's start with the background of German New Medicine. So as most people know, German New Medicine was discovered by a brilliant medical doctor in Germany called Gerhard Hammer. And it entered his life when his son was accidentally killed, and after which he developed testicular cancer. And he, having been very healthy, correlated this shock with his condition and had the question, I'm perceiving the shock with my brain. How does my brain mediate the shock to my body? And he started looking at brain CAT scans where he noticed that people had these lesions, these concentric circles. In medicine, they're called target rings. And after observing hundreds of people, he noticed that the target rings were in the same position for each condition. Well, for each, at first he thought it was only applied to cancer. Later, he found out that this applies to most other diseases as well. So then, as he continued to observe his patient's progress, he noticed different patterns that we have not noticed ever. They're totally new patterns of disease progression and healing. And he calls these the 5 biological laws, and that's what we're going to go over. And since then, we have thousands of case histories, many from Dr. Hammer, and many other related insights that come together with the 5 laws to create the system of German New Medicine, which is quite broad. And now we have German New Medicine practitioners around the world, and it keeps spreading as people get to know about it. My personal introduction to German New Medicine came after my second husband was diagnosed with brain tumors, and Dr. Hammer predicted that these tumors were related to 3 conditions. And after we unfortunately lost Mickey, the autopsy showed that he had all those conditions, even though they weren't obvious before he died. And that catapulted me into studying German New Medicine and started to use it in my practice in 2003, saw startling results, especially with cancer, and collected my case history along with a simple explanation of German New Medicine in a book that I like to recommend to people who might consider using German New Medicine for themselves. So let's head into the laws. So the first law of German New Medicine tells us that biological shocks create lesions in the brain and simultaneous effects in the body. Then we have to ask, what is a biological shock? And that is an intense surprise, which on some level threatens our survival instincts. And it puts us into a shock state where we isolate, our hands and feet get cold, our digestion isn't so good, we don't sleep well. And also, Dr. Hammer noticed that along with these general shock symptoms, that there would be a specific symptom related to what the shock was. But it isn't the kind of shock per se that determines the symptoms, these specific symptoms. It's how we respond to the shock. So for instance, if there's a sudden separation, someone's long-term partner suddenly leaves, it's a huge shock for people. But we can respond with anger, which might hit the stomach. We could respond with grief of separation, which might hit the breast tubules. We might respond with fear of financial lack, which would hit the liver tissues and might create cysts. So he started to put these patterns together into this chart, which covers almost all of medicine and relates these shocks to the embryological brain level, as well as our evolutionary instincts when we were still in survival mode in tribes and more living in nature. Now we don't relate to these shocks anymore. And so they've kind of gone underground. And in bringing them to consciousness, Dr. Hammer has given us the gift of being able to work with conditions on this emotional level. And sometimes, or often even, a condition can be totally resolved by resolving the shock. So the other thing that Dr. Hammer discovered is that, which is very counterintuitive for us, is that these symptoms are actually the body's attempt at helping us with the shock. So as an example, Dr. Hammer's testicular cancer, so a growth of the testicle, increasing the hormonal capacity, was to improve his ability to conceive a new child because he'd lost a child. Totally stunning. And so, and the last point I want to make for this slide is that we also need to rule out other causes. German New Medicine isn't the only cause of disease. We have to rule out structural causes, toxicity, nutritional deficiencies. So that's really important to know. So we'll go on to the chart that Dr. Hammer conceptualized to describe German New Medicine. And we'll just, as we go through the laws, we'll complete the chart. So for the law number 1, I don't know if you can see my cursor here. Can you see my cursor? Okay, so we're here. So the chart, this graph describes our nervous system. The top part of the graph is our sympathetic or stress nervous system. The bottom part of the graph is parasympathetic or our relaxed and restore nervous system. So we have these two parallel nervous systems in our body. And what happens in daily life is that we wake up in the morning and the cortisol starts to rise. So we go more into sympathetic mode to respond to the stress of the day. And then in later afternoon, the nervous system starts to switch to the parasympathetic mode so that we can rest, so that we can sleep. And in our sleep, we heal from the stress of the day. And we only heal when we're asleep. So that's a very important point. It's very naturopathic and Ayurvedic. So we're going along, wake, sleep, and bang, we get hit by a shock. And in German New Medicine, the term for shock is Hammer syndrome. And Dr. Hammer coined that in honor of his son, Dirk. So this is a shock that puts us into sympathetic mode. And as I described, you have your general shock symptoms, which again are feeling shocked, and often there's a tendency to isolate. You have cold hands and feet, difficulty sleeping, difficulty eating because the digestive tract is shut down when we're in fight or flight, which is fight or flight is another way of describing sympathetic state. And then we have a specific symptom that will relate to the type of shock it is. So let's say if it was a separation and we felt a grieving, it might be a breast tubule, a ductal, breast duct cancer. And it's not always cancers. It can be joint pain, it can be skin rashes, but we'll go into that with the other laws because there's a lot more to this. But when we can start understanding about how to use nutrition with German New Medicine, because when we're in this shocked state, when we're in sympathetic mode that's extreme, where it's hard to eat and sleep, then the nutritional guidelines for that is a very nourishing but easy to digest diet. So things like soups, and preferably with high protein, but easy to digest protein, and high minerals, like putting seaweed or even mineral supplements, because when we're in this high stress mode, we lose protein and minerals through the urine specifically. Things like protein shakes, soft boiled eggs, or eggs made not hard, so they're easier to digest. Steamed veggies rather than raw, because it's, again, easier to digest. And cooked whole grains. I usually recommend that people stay away from wheat because it tends to be quite irritating to the system. So that, and to eat small doses fairly often during the day, because the body can't handle whole meals very well and will probably get indigestion. So I wanted to also, in the next slide, show you 2 hair analyses from people who were in major active state. And so just orient you to the hair analysis. So the top is heavy metals. And you'll notice that both of these people don't show any degree of heavy metals. And this is really important to understand because when we're in the stress state, we can't detoxify very well and we can't get rid of our heavy metals. So they tend to be sequestered in the cells and won't show up when we're in big stress. So it doesn't mean that we don't have any. So what I would do then is repeat the hair analysis when people are out of their stress state for several months to see, then we'll be able to see their heavy metal load. Then we go into the next section, which are the structural elements. And you can see that, no, this isn't actually the one I wanted, but so this one is fairly okay, except for one low red, so it's better than usual, although the calcium is a bit low, again, losing minerals in the urine. Here, the calcium, the magnesium is high, but actually the pattern that I wanted to show, and I actually put the wrong hair analysis on, sorry, is when the magnesium and the calcium and the strontium are all really high. And that means that the body has become acidic. Often in stress, we're more acid because the stress chemicals tend to be acidic. And when we don't digest very well, our bodies become acidic. And our blood has to be a very specific pH, a very specific type level of acidity. And if it goes to acidic, if it went beyond that level, that window of acidity, we would die instantly. So immediately, if the body goes to acid, it pulls minerals from the bones, calcium, magnesium, strontium, and sometimes even barium. And you can see this in hair analysis because they'll be really high. And then probably that person, those minerals will be quite low in the body. And this is a response, a very specific response to feeling devalued, that the bones will be affected. So it's very interesting that not everybody who's stressed has osteoporosis, for instance. And it's not specifically a nutritional problem. This is where German New Medicine can explain it much better, because there was this mystery that in Eastern Europe, when women become postmenopausal, they did not have the level of osteoporosis of the North American women. And yet their nutrition was actually quite poor. And the German New Medicine explanation for this was that in Eastern Europe, when women become postmenopausal, apparently they're more the matriarchs. They gain more power. And so they're not devalued when they get older. Whereas in our culture, women are devalued or sometimes perceive themselves as being devalued, which is, of course, the key point. It's how we perceive something. So if we perceive ourselves as devalued, then we can actually lose bone in the area that symbolizes where we feel devalued. So neck, intellectual devaluation, hips could be sexual, that kind of thing. So it's very interesting that you can pick this up in a hair analysis, and of course you can't here. The only other thing I wanted to show with this is that here are the elements that are related to stress in the adrenal gland. And when people are in chronic stress, these will be off the chart, either high or low. So then you can tell if people are in active state. I mean, you can tell just by their symptoms, but this will confirm, and you can monitor them with the hair analysis as they come out of the active state. So there are lots more things, but I think I better move on. Okay, so let's go to Law 2 in German New Medicine. It starts becoming very, very interesting because Hammer noticed that when people resolved their shocks, that they slipped into a new phase. They slipped into what he ended up calling the healing phase. So Law 2 says there are two possible phases for each shock: active, when we're still in the shock, and healing, when we've resolved it, each with its own clear symptoms. So some of the symptoms of healing look like a totally different disease, and he pulled these together. So it's quite startling. And he created this chart that predicts the course of disease. So if you have this kind of shock, let's say you have a shock of feeling devalued, let's say for performance, which would be usually the hands for most of us, then in the shock phase, we would have all the symptoms of shock, no symptoms in our hands. But in the healing phase, the joints in our hands would start to ache. But before, we never had that connection, and now we do. And those healing symptoms are self-limiting and stop on their own. And so sometimes we don't resolve something completely. We keep relapsing back and forth from shock to healing and back, because we get triggered. And that's the concept of hanging healing and chronic inflammation, because Dr. Hammer discovered that part of healing is inflammation. So we look at inflammation as this huge mechanism for disease, and we try to control it at all cost, both medically and in natural medicine. And yet it needs to run its course in order for us to heal. I'm simplifying here. Sometimes, of course, you would try to decrease the inflammation from the outside, because sometimes it's not easy to resolve one's shocks. But this ties into then the allergies, because all allergies are a hanging healing, which means that, and I'll come back to this later, that when we're in shock, we associate our environment with the shock. And so those aspects of the environment that we experience during a shock become triggers. And so I'll get back to that later. And the significance of Law 2 in practice is that a lot of symptoms that people come with are actually in the healing phase, and we can teach people how to ride them out and be much more relaxed with them rather than fighting them. And it works quite well. So let me just see if I have all my points here. Okay, so explaining this with the chart. So here we have daily function. Here we have the active phase being in sympathetic mode. And here we have the healing phase where the body switches into parasympathetic nervous system. So rest, restore, relax. And the symptoms in the healing phase, the general symptoms, are fatigue. And sometimes the fatigue can be debilitating. So it's very important to know that, because people can go into chronic fatigue and see that as a disease as opposed to a symptom of healing. And if you see it as a symptom of healing, you can deal with it in a smoother way. Another thing is when we go into healing phase is we start retaining water. And so we can get puffy, we can gain a bit of weight. Our appetite tends to come back. We can get warmer, whereas in the active phase, we tend to be chilly. And that warmth can even be fevers and infections, which we'll talk about in Law 4. So we have all of those general symptoms, and then we have the specific symptoms that are specifically related to the shock, like joint pain with devaluation, or skin rashes are a healing phase of separation. So we'll talk about that more when we get into allergies. Law 3 is my favorite because it offers so much hope for healing conditions that we now have quite a bit of trouble healing. So Law 3 tells us that the physical symptoms following a shock fall into 2 basic patterns. And those patterns are dependent on which part of the brain that they've affected. And the brain falls basically into 2 parts. Old brain, which is our evolutionary old brain, brainstem, cerebellum, and new brain, which is more our frontal lobe. And what happens when a shock affects the old brain, which is more based on survival, is that it stimulates cells to grow in an attempt to help us. So for instance, if we have a death fright, think we're going to die, or we think somebody else close to us is going to die, our body will respond by growing lung cells, because our primary requirement for life is air. So our lung is actually trying to help us by creating more air cells. We call this lung cancer, and yet it's simply our body trying to help. We've had some amazing clinical results with lung cancer based on this. In the new brain, there are 2 patterns. One of the patterns is that the affected tissue or organ will start to ulcerate or lose cells. But this will be asymptomatic. You won't feel it. And the other pattern for the new brain is a functional loss. So it could be a paralysis, for instance, or a numbness on the skin. So then when the healing phase kicks in, both the old brain and the new brain have specific patterns again. So for the old brain, that cell increase, or let's say a tumor, stops growing instantly. And it's very simple. There's the reason for it has been resolved. So let's say there's no reason for a death fright anymore. That tumor or those collection of cells will stop growing and just become a part of the lung. There's another possibility we'll talk about in stage 4 related to microbes. That's for the old brain. For the new brain, the asymptomatic ulceration, so that the cell loss that we don't feel will start to grow back and replenish and repair in the healing phase. And that's where we feel it. That's where we get the symptoms of, let's say, inflammation and pain. Let's say joint pain or pain from a skin rash. And it's self-limited. So those healing phase symptoms, if not interrupted by relapse into the shock, by trigger, for instance, will finish themselves. There are two parts to, well, I'll talk about this with the chart. It'll be easy to see, but it's self-limiting and those symptoms will end. If it's a functional loss, then the function will return, for instance, the paralysis. And I often give examples of MS and Parkinson's as functional conditions, according to German New Medicine. We've had startling results. So let's show how this works on the chart. So old brain is yellow. So old brain in the active phase will increase cells, tumors, and I'm going to talk about that bacteria in the next law. And if and when there's a resolution, that tumor stops growing. And again, the degradation we'll talk about the next law. So that's old brain pattern. And then the general symptoms again, cold, poor digestion, isolated, feeling shocked, to more relaxed, warmth, infections, fever, which we'll talk about under Law 4. In the new brain, in the shock phase, there are two patterns. One is that there's cell loss, so an ulceration that you can't feel. And the second possibility is that you lose a function. If and when there's a resolution, because there isn't always a resolution, sometimes we get stuck in the active phase. But if there is a resolution, then everything switches. So instead of ulceration, there's cell growth. And if the ulceration has been chronic for a long time, the growth and the repair can present itself as a tumor. But this is a different kind of tumor than those from the old brain. The new brain tumors, which grow in the healing phase, are self-limiting. And that's what's so exciting. We've had wonderful success with people coming with healing phase tumors and people who understand German New Medicine after they learn it, and they can relax into the healing and the tumor stops on its own. So examples of that are ovarian tumor, which is in the pregnancy cycle. And there are many others. And then if there's a functional loss, the functional will come back here. Now, just to explain a little bit more about the healing phase, there are two parts. A is where you have the fever, the infections, the water retention. And then in the middle, there's a spike where the brain goes, there's enough healing. I'm going to kick the body back into normal daily rhythm. And then it'll go through one more phase of healing where the water gets peed out. They call it the pee-pee phase. And then we go back to our normal rhythm, hopefully stronger than ever. So Law 4, also very counterintuitive. Hammer observed that all microorganisms, fungi, bacteria, possibly viruses, are only active during the healing phase, and they're trying to help us. And this has long been observed in homeopathic medicine in the sense that as a person heals, they'll often get a fever. And more specifically, Hammer noticed that the type of organism matches the level of the brain. So as we evolved over 1 million years, we evolved with these microorganisms. and they help us with our healing. So in the old brain, it's the oldest type of microorganisms, which are the fungi or mycobacteria, which cause TB. In the midbrain, which is a combination of old and new, there are bacteria. And in the new brain, supposedly viruses. Dr. Hammer suspected that there aren't viruses. And I was always wondering, well, we see pictures of viruses. And now there's new information, and you can look up Dr. Kaufman, Kaufman, and he has new research on particles that are expressed by cells that look exactly like what we interpreted as viruses coming from the outside. And they are expressed during times of stress and toxicity. So it's interesting that when they express, our immune system acts up. So it looks like maybe a cold or a flu, and we have these little particles. We've always assumed that they come from the outside. And from naturopathic medicine, we've always seen flus, for instance, and infections not so much as contagious as internally generated. So this new science about exosomes is more congruent with naturopathic and German new medicine. So it's very exciting. So with the COVID, we would not say, we would look at it from a totally different viewpoint. So examples of Law 4 would be that after a lung cancer is over, in other words, when a person resolves their fear of death, if they have the TB bacteria, the TB will actually break down those tumors that are no longer needed. Bronchial cancer is a new brain cancer, and in the healing phase, there'll actually be like a pneumonia where I've seen people actually cough out their tumor. And so the significance is we can let infections run their course as part of healing unless they're dangerous. And the nutritional aspect of this is that I've noticed that when, for instance, I'm feeling there's a flu coming on, if I stop eating, just drink warm fluids and rest and use some kind of natural immune booster like echinacea, it'll stop the flu in its tracks. So it's almost like the body needs all its energy to proceed with the healing. And if we eat, it slows it down and congests it. And then we get stuck in a much longer course of flus or colds or any other infection. So any infection, to eat lightly. So broth, juices, teas, rest a lot. And again, if I feel a flu seriously coming on, my joints are starting to ache, I can kick it out in 2 hours and it's gone. It doesn't come back. So that's the nutritional aspect for Law 4. So here in the chart, in the healing phase, this is where the microorganisms would be working. But one of the startling things that Dr. Hammer noticed was that the body, if it's shocked, let's say from the old brain, it'll start stockpiling TB bacteria in the active phase. It's almost like some people are TB carriers, but they don't express it. So they've been possibly shocked, have the TB ready. When there's a resolution, the TB can then degrade the tumor. So the body is absolutely splendidly intelligent. And the infection phase, or the infection part of the healing phase is in the first part. So then going into Law 5, basically it summarizes what German New Medicine has found, that diseases are special programs of nature designed to help the individual or the species. And that would be when we get to the end of a healing phase, we're stronger. So for instance, bone cancer strengthens the bone. And if we get through allergies, we then have a bigger resilience to environmental toxins. So we can learn to trust our bodies and allow them to heal with a minimum of intervention. And I keep mentioning our clinic saved OHIP $2 million. It always startles me that this has actually happened with people with treatments that were no longer necessary and people outliving their prognoses for years and decades. And so we don't need to do that now. So using German New Medicine in general, there's a copy of my book. Ellie decorated my slides, so I guess she put that in there. So this is very important as an overview before we head into allergies and nutrition and detox, that if you want to use German New Medicine, it's very important that you study it. What we're doing here is just the tip of an iceberg. There are many more pieces, like the role of fear, what happens to the lesions in the brain, metastases, handedness, all very important. And you have to see that it makes sense to you. It's not faith-based. It's not like an affirmation that you can do. You have to do emotional work. You have to be able to be connected to yourself. And I find that people who have never done any emotional work, this is very difficult for them. So often I'll say, don't just use German New Medicine by itself. So then that's a whole screening process. So once you've decided to use it, you have to determine the type of shock. And of course, Dr. Hammer has created this chart which associates the emotional or biological shocks that go with most diseases. So we can look that up, and then we have to try and find that in a person's life. And sometimes you can, and sometimes people can't remember them. So that's very important. You can still use this. It's really good if the people can remember the shock. And then you'd have to determine which phase you're in, active or healing, because if you're in active, you have to resolve a shock in order to move into healing. And if you're already in healing phase, you have to understand your healing phase symptoms and learn how to ride them out and learn how to support the body. And you have to learn how to avoid triggers, because that can keep knocking us back into a hanging healing. And overall, and this is of course good for any system of healing, to cultivate a process of self-awareness. So meditation, journaling, co-counseling, therapy, to prevent future shocks from taking hold. The more we know ourselves and clear old stuff, old baggage, the more resilient we are and the less vulnerable to shocks. And this is also lifestyle-wise. So if we strengthen ourselves physically, we're also more resilient to shocks. And to keep studying. And I mentioned this in the introduction, that people become all gung-ho about German New Medicine. They think they understand it, and then they start getting healing phase symptoms, and they immediately flip back into what they've believed all their lives. So it's really important to keep studying, reading, talking to people if you're serious about using this. Okay, let's talk about allergies. So allergies, according to German New Medicine, are triggers to past shocks. So how this works is that during a shock, the brain registers all the sensations at the time of the shock and associates them with the shock. So if we happen to be eating, those foods could become tracks that trigger symptoms. Look at my notes here. So other environmental triggers could be the weather, scents, pollen, people, pets, noises, locations, and even an emotion. And all of these are warning signals to us. And they may become extended tracks. So in other words, we can develop more allergies on top of our allergies associated with the same shock. So when we're triggered by a track, so let's use an example. So let's say a certain food, and it could be ice cream, is associated with shock of being yelled at when we're a child. So that would trigger a hearing shock. And so eating ice cream might trigger ear infections. Because what happens is that when you are triggered, you are triggered into active phase, which then moves into the healing phase. So it's mostly the healing phase symptoms that we associate with allergies. The active phase is the shock phase. That replay of the shock is actually quite short. And then the allergies can be long or short too, depending on how we respond to them. I've seen an allergy which was a stuffed up nose, so it was hay fever. So it was a reaction to pollen, which was so bad that the person just wanted drugs. And within 10 minutes of processing their shock, they breathed totally clearly. It was just amazing. So the allergy symptoms are most intense during the epileptic crisis. And that's that sympathetic spike in the middle of the healing phase. German New Medicine says that there's a different role for antibodies. So we sometimes measure antibodies as a clue to allergies. And we think that the antibodies are attacking these foreign bodies or these allergens. And German New Medicine says that that's not an attack, but an alarm, a preparation for danger. So it's a bit of a different way of looking at this. And symptoms are clues about what the shock was. So if you get, let's say, ear symptoms when you're eating the ice cream, it means that that was a hearing shock. If you get a lung symptom for an allergy or an allergen as a trigger, that would be a fright. If you're getting sinus dripping or sinus infection, we call that a stink conflict. And that's a conflict that we have with somebody close to us who we smell. So you can see that this is a whole different way of looking at allergies. Joint pain would be related to a devaluation. Stomach response, a stomach allergy, for instance, would be anger. And even migraine, which we can sometimes relate to foods, would be actually a healing process of many different shocks. It's a general shock, and it's related to what happens in the brain when we heal, which is that we retain water in the brain, and we could have headaches when we heal. So I realize that this is all a lot of information and very different. So here's how we would use that information. So the first thing in treating allergies with German New Medicine is to explain the mechanism in an empowering way. In other words, this is not about the allergens, it's about your response, your internal response to it. And you actually have control. It's a bit tricky because if you get somebody with environmental allergies, like multiple chemical sensitivity, for instance, they're often told this is emotional, this is all in your head, and they're very sensitive to that. So you have to tell them in a way that empowers them, like you can actually take control of this. Yes, it's in your head, but this is not to blame you. This is to give you the power to undo this. I've seen amazing results with telling people that and telling people that allergies are totally treatable and that I've seen them often treated. And in a first visit, just telling people those two things, I'll often see even up to 50% of their allergy symptoms back just from that information if they can absorb it. Now I have a few allergy patients that are stuck in the story of being an allergy victim. And sometimes sometimes people are not ready to move out of that. And that takes a lot of skill. And sometimes I don't have that skill in terms of facilitating people out of that story. but that takes a lot of compassion and kindness and reflection back. So the second point is that sometimes when people have allergies, they'll start to be afraid of their environment, and they'll generate more and more allergies because of that fear. It's like a shock about the environment. They'll be afraid, and this can lead to the multiple chemical sensitivity. And I wrote down here to tell a case because it was so educational for us. We had a healing house. Like, I opened my house for people to come and stay when I was living away for 2 years. And we had one young man come with multiple chemical sensitivities who had just been fired by the top environmental doctor in Ottawa. And he came and he was so sick. He had brought his girlfriend who was taking care of him and who was exhausted. And he was just saying, staff have to go and wash their hair. They can't cook. I mean, everybody almost quit on me. And the other patients who were at the healing house at that point almost left. So there was this big alarm. So I came the next day and I sat him down and I explained this in a way that, you know, you're obviously really feisty, you have a lot of intelligence, and we can use all of that for you to decrease your fear of the environment. And I explained how that fear was creating the allergies. Within 1 day, he took off his mask, he was hugging trees, he was cooking, his girlfriend could go home and recover, and he was helping the other patients by giving them shoulder massages. It was the most extraordinary thing we'd ever seen, and we didn't know that was possible. So I like to share that case because it taught us so much. So then the third point is about finding the shock. And I write here, be careful, go slowly, because we can re-traumatize ourselves and each other by talking about our shocks. Sometimes people's shocks are fairly intense and horrible. So we have to kind of be sensitive to body language when we start talking. Like, if people are starting to get frantic or crying, you know, we might want to slow down and be careful with that. What I found was you can actually treat the allergies without totally resolving the shock. It's almost like separating them. So the allergies are a physical response to this trauma, and we can acknowledge and take responsibility for the trauma, and even tell the people, we don't know exactly what it is, but we're going to work with the trauma, and the physical symptoms don't need to be there. And we can treat them naturopathically as well, which I'll go on to explain. So this has been a big enlightenment, and it's a joy to treat allergies now. So again, resolving the shock, be careful about re-traumatizing. And often I'll work with emotional healers. I'm not doing deep emotional work right now, so I'll often team with somebody else. We have an emotional healer, Lisa Kopel, and our massage therapist, Chris Karpinski, also does emotional healing. We have a Reiki therapist, Sylvia McGee, and so often we'll work as a team if somebody has deep trauma, and go really slowly. So the fifth one I've already said. Okay, so let's now integrate the naturopathic part of allergies. So most practitioners associate, naturopathic practitioners and other natural medicine practitioners associate allergies with liver. And why that is, because when the liver gets too congested, it's like a sponge, and it's a sponge that carries all of this congestion or toxins, and for whatever reason isn't getting them out, sometimes because we're eating wrong and the body doesn't have time to detox, or because we're too stressed to detox, or because the liver's too tired to detox, which is really important. So then what happens is it can't absorb any more irritating substances, and they circulate, and they make the body prone to being irritated. So then when we have another irritation like pollen or dust, we're prone to being irritated. And so it's interesting that even though those things might be a track, that clearing the liver and detoxifying the body, and we'll talk about that later, can cut those things from being a trigger, I've noticed. So that's not totally German new medicine, but that's my observation as a naturopathic doctor, because we were treating allergies successfully before knowing German new medicine. The second physical part that we treat with in naturopathic medicine for allergies is the digestive system and the pancreas. Because when we don't digest well, we leave some of our food particles as too big to be absorbed properly. And they don't absorb into the cells, and they circulate and they annoy the system. So it's a bit of a similar mechanism to the liver. And then when the adrenals are low, the adrenals are our energy gland, but they also are our anti-inflammatory gland. They produce our own cortisoids. So our internal cortisol, controlling inflammation. So when our adrenals are really low from chronic stress and exhausted, then we can't control some of the inflammatory allergy symptoms that we get, like skin, like nose, like lung, like joints. And then other symptoms that then are secondary to these first three could be joints, lungs, the mind, because the mind can have allergy symptoms like brain fog, skin, heart, nervous system, the blood, female, male systems. And of course, we understand these in naturopathic medicine and treat them with lifestyle, supplements, homeopathy, acupuncture. And then we can look at each of these parts and match them with the German new medicine shock. So doing that all together is wonderful. The other thing that I've recently started using much more deeply is the blood type diets. And I used to use them very simply. Type A would be more vegetarian, type O would be more meat eating, no wheat. But then I went to a conference where people described how even eating in a lot of detail, eating their avoids for their blood type would cause this chronic inflammation. And so I've started using very detailed lists of foods for people's blood type. And for each category, proteins, carbs, seeds, oils, sugars, spices, there are optimal foods, neutral foods, and avoids. And what happens is that when we eat our avoid foods every day, they become an irritant, but we interpret that as a stimulant. So we get addicted to our avoid foods. So it's been really interesting that when people say, oh, I can't live without that, we all nod our heads and go, yep, that's the thing that's going to make you feel the best when you let go of it. And we go very gently. Changing the diet is a profound process. So I'm always very gentle with it and say to people, here's the list, you play with it. You find your substitutions and keep going. And some people will be very motivated and do it right away. And we have amazing results with people losing their symptoms just doing the blood type. I mean, last week I had somebody who was free of their arthritis for the first time in years just from doing the blood type diet. And the other thing that I use, so that cleaning up your diet according to your blood type will help decrease the inflammation and will help resolve allergic symptoms. And then the Ayurvedic type, I'm going to talk about that more under diet. So giving people their diet according to their Ayurvedic type as well helps allergies, because if you eat wrong for your type, it also irritates the system. So earth types, which are well-built people, blue eyes, gain weight easily, they congest easily. So they're best not eating congestive foods like heavy meat, dairy, and wheat. And that allows their body to detox and not have such allergy symptoms, especially phlegm. Liver, the medium types tend to have liver symptoms. So if you change their diet that's good for their type, then it will support this liver aspect that we talked about. And then the air types, the more sensitive types, would have colon and nervous system issues. In other words, they stress easily, so you have to do more relaxation and make sure their colon cleans out, and that will help them with their allergies. Okay, moving ahead, let's talk about diet. So my teacher, Ilse-Dora Laker, has drummed this into me, that in the healing phase, you don't fast or detoxify. Because if you've been under stress for quite a long time, it's depleted your body, it's depleted your nutrients. You've lost lots of proteins and minerals through your urine, and you need to replenish. So I would qualify that unless you have a very strong body and maybe the active phase has just been short. So it's very similar to the active phase eating, where you would eat restorative foods. So easy to digest proteins. And I added here also raw and organic milk products for people who don't tend to build phlegm. And mineral-rich foods, I've added here seaweeds, bone broth, nutritional herbs, such as lamb's quarters, organic vegetables, nut and seed butters are all very nourishing. So again, not juice fasting or going on a raw diet. This is not the time to go vegan for most people, although these aren't hard and fast rules, they're just guidelines, and they can all be changed dependent on the person. What I've noticed is be careful about too many greens. Greens are incredibly medicinal, and they push the liver into detox. So I find that people who are sensitive or people who are not strong or they have a tired liver react to greens. They don't feel good. And so you have to watch that. So people who do these kale smoothies every morning, often not a good idea. And it might keep them in a weak spot. So then if we combine that with the diet according to naturopathy and Ayurveda, so the first thing that we do as naturopaths is give diets for the condition. So let's say somebody's got diabetes, then of course we would do low sugar and whole grain, like whole carbs and good proteins. Now, in using German New Medicine, I've seen diabetes resolve in one visit through addressing the shock of diabetes. So, but when it's not easily resolvable, I find that if you combine the program with the appropriate diet for the condition, it will really help the person not get worse and even improve, even though they haven't resolved their issue. So I find this hugely helpful. Constitutional types. So these are the Ayurvedic types. So again, Vata people, they're slender people or people who hold a lot of weight to balance their sensitivity. But definitely sensitive. They tend to have brown eyes, dark skin, dark hair, and they should always eat easy to digest food. And most of the types, when any of us get unbalanced, crave what's bad for us. So the Vata, the air types, will crave raw food. And it's the worst thing that they can eat and will deplete them even more. And then they'll also tend to be marathon runners, which is also not a great balance for them. Again, this is not for everybody, but as a general rule. So I've had a lot of people say, well, I exercise, 10 times a week and I'm eating this vegan raw food diet and I'm so tired. And when we do the assessment, we find that their body can't even digest the raw food, and it needs a much slower restoration. And you can actually move towards raw food and vegan food. You just have to strengthen your body to be able to handle it because it's harder to digest. And you have to be careful in the winter time because raw food is very cooling. So not generally good for our winters. And this is, again, general, traditional diet information. The Pitta, the medium types, tend to crave stimulating foods. The Pitta, the fiery types, they like excitement. They like stimulation. They like spices. They like coffee, and that imbalances them. They like really exciting sports. They overdo it. They get really red in the face, and all of this aggravates their liver. So in explaining that to a Pitta type is a bit tricky because Pitta types know everything. I'm a Pitta type, so I can say that. And so you have to be very gentle and intelligent with them to explain why they might come off of these stimulating things. You can show them how they're overstimulating their bodies and causing a tiredness that will eventually cause very difficult aging. And Kapha types, the heavy types, as I said, the heavy types do well on the lightest diet, but not raw food. Cooked, they can have good spices. And using the blood type diet, I think I already explained most of what I needed to say about that and about the recent case with the arthritis. We were very impressed. And then general eating guidelines are just as important as what you eat. So there are principles about eating that we routinely break in our culture. Like, for one thing, is we don't digest if we're stressed. So if we stop and slow down before a meal, sit around, take some tea and relax. I sometimes get people to do a 10-minute corpse pose when they get home from work or later in the afternoon, to just have the body completely switch towards parasympathetic mode when we digest well. And sometimes this is really hard to do and to learn. So we have to be very gentle with ourselves and with our patients, because if we've been in stress mode for decades, all our lives and generations in our family, I sometimes get people to do alternate nostril breathing before, and often people will be very low mineral, and then it's very hard for them to calm themselves down. So they'll need mineral supplements for their nervous system to even begin to start to work. So relaxing before meals, not drinking too much with a meal. So half a cup hot or room temperature water, just sipped with a meal to help the enzymes work. If we drink more than that, especially if it's cold, we dilute and we inactivate our enzymes. It's a warming process. We're burning our food with the enzymes. We don't want cold drinks. So that's a big deal. I mean, with our culture, we often drink ice water, for instance, when we go to a restaurant, or drink cold milk with a meal. It really slows down the digestion. The other thing is food combining. Although I find that if somebody has a good digestion, they don't have to worry about food combining too much. The main things about food combining is to have fruit separately and to not mix a very heavy carb with a heavy protein. So meat and potatoes. So it's better meat and vegetables, maybe some rice, or starch, like a heavier starch would be a squash, maybe with fish. That's a lighter protein. And it's much easier to digest because proteins require acid, starches require alkaline, and of course, our bodies are really intelligent. They can digest all that together, but most modern people don't have very good don't have strong digestive systems. So we can help them by using food combining. And the other thing is to give good breaks between meals. Now, there are exceptions to that, and that's by a condition, but most people do well with leaving 4 to 5 hours between a meal so that we're actually hungry when we eat. So those of us who eat emotionally, that's actually not a good thing to do, because if people are used to soothing themselves with food, you wouldn't take that away from them. You would start to modify that with being healthier snacks, with smaller meals, and rebalancing the underlying emotion and also the physical, in other words, maybe the mineral lack and other internal organs to strengthen them so that they can handle not going without food and not having meals for that long. And it's quite lovely. For me, I used to be very hypoglycemic and used to flip out if I couldn't have my meals. And so it's wonderful to have strengthened myself enough that I can fast now for 3 days and still feel strong. The other thing is that I used to be allergic to everything, and now don't have allergies. So then changing your diet when not to, and that is usually an emotional thing. Again, it's when people come to me and they have addictions, let's say they smoke or they drink or they're doing whatever, I don't take that away unless it's life-threatening. It doesn't work. It has to come from inside them, and to go very slowly and work in a balance and work at strengthening them so that they're able to let go of the addictions. So that often involves doing emotional work to resolve issues and not be so stressed. And sometimes it's like social medicine. Like I've been known to kidnap my patients and keep them at my place for a while because they need to be out of a stress situation. That's social medicine. Okay, so now we're going to our last topic, which is detoxification. So what it is, it's basically the process of the body letting go of excess toxins and congestion. And the body can be either in eating mode or detox mode. And so basically what it does, it finishes digestion and then it does detox. And the biological pattern tends to be you finish dinner, you digest dinner, you go to sleep, the body does repair and healing, and then about 1 o'clock in the morning, it switches into detox. You wake up in the morning, have a bowel movement, the liver cleans itself out, you have a light breakfast, and then you have a nice heavy lunch, and then a light dinner. And that's part of this flow that we have. Most or many people in our culture have lost this rhythm. And so signs that we need to detoxify include irritability, sleeping problems, especially waking around 3 in the morning, constipation, loss of appetite, cravings is a big indication for detoxification, because when our body becomes toxic or congested, we get sluggish, we get fatigued, and we crave in order to try to have more energy. Decreased libido, memory, brain fog, all can be signs of congestion. So the observations in my practice is that people detoxify in the healing phase and it's suppressed in the active phase. So if people have been in active phase, sometimes for decades, sometimes since their childhood, then they have a huge amount of crud built up in their bodies. And you can see through the physical exam and where it is. Like you can see if it's in the lymph, you can see if it's in the liver, you can see if it's in the colon, and also by people's symptoms. And then you can decongest them according to where things are. There are different herbs that work on different organs, different diets that work on different organs. And when you're looking to detoxify, you have to determine whether a person is strong enough. Sometimes a person can be congested, but also so depleted that if you detoxify them, you'll knock them over. So I have a blood pressure test where people lie down and I'll get a resting blood pressure and then they'll sit up. And if that blood pressure drops when they sit up, that's a sign of exhaustion and burnout. And you have to build people before you can detoxify them. Also the pulses, the tongue, lymph puffiness around the neck. So physical exam is wonderful for determining what's actually going on. There are also tendencies for each of the Ayurvedic types. So if I see someone who's a Vata type, typically thin, brown eyes, brown skin, brown hair, I'll know that they'll have a tendency to congest in the colon. Liver types tend to congest in the liver, and the stronger built types tend to congest the lymph. And it's very, very consistent. So if I look at somebody, I can pretty much predict where they're going to be toxic. Then there are also, and this is probably the most important thing to know about detoxification, there are contraindications from doing it yourself. Pregnancy and nursing are the biggest one, because if we detoxify while pregnant or nursing, those toxins, and they can be pretty heavy. We've had people detoxify drugs and feel the drugs going through their system again, like either psychedelic or medical. We've had people who were, there's a case where there was a hairdresser and they used to use this blue liquid. She soaked all her sheets blue from sweating when she was detoxifying. So those toxins will come out into the child or into the breast milk. So it's a very big rule not to detoxify in those situations. When there's high stress, this is also really important because it will bounce. When we're stressed, everything clenches and the body can't relax enough to let things go. And there's certain illnesses where, so if you're in an illness and you're taking medications, it's really important that you have supervision. It doesn't mean you can't do it. You would just do it very gently and carefully. If someone's exhausted, as I said, their body isn't strong enough to detoxify. Blocked bowels, huge contraindication. The bowels have to be moving before we detoxify because that's where most of the toxins will end up going. Eating disorders, you don't want to touch detox until the eating disorder and the mind feels more comfortable. If people are too underweight or recovering from surgery. So these are somewhat self-explanatory, but they're really important to know. And I have to say that after having said all of those things, I want to encourage you to learn to detoxify because every bit of research shows that people live years longer when we have cleaner bodies. And they've even done animal studies that show animals on average live 20% longer. So how to detoxify safely? So you check that there are no contraindications, check the person's strength, go slowly. So you're eliminating the heavier foods and increasing the lighter foods. And then I've got a whole list of detox supports here. And you start by doing short programs so that the person can learn to transition back. For people who aren't used to detoxifying, you can ruin a whole cleanse by eating too much, too fast, too soon afterwards. So if you do them short and easy, then they can't do too much damage when they come off of it. Daily cleansing routines. These are actually more important than doing detox programs. And that is what I mentioned when I said we have this natural flow of the cleansing time of our bodies is in the morning. So if you can flush when you get up in the morning, cultivate a bowel movement in the morning. I put here knees up because that helps the bowel movement. Flush the system before eating. Water, lemon water. Make sure you rinse your teeth after taking lemon water. Lemon flushes the liver and kidney. Herbal teas, something like dandelion. Dandelion is quite medicinal, so you wouldn't take it all the time, but mint tea is okay in general. And then you improve the diet as per your constitution, your condition, your blood type, and I put here reality. So it's really important that you don't take on a diet that's unrealistic because we just set ourselves up to failure. Small changes, I find, are the most profound. Movement according to body type and condition. Movement helps us detoxify. And then emotional awareness and healing, positive self-talk, German New Medicine study, because if we know the emotional shocks and issues that we need to work on, this will help our body detoxify. We'll get out of these active states. And then spiritual opening is good for everything. And if we can find a practice that we love, that brings us joy, like the sound or meditation or something that just relaxes us and makes us feel good. The opposite to stress is actually pleasure. So a healthy pleasure really helps us heal. All right, we are finished the general material. So briefly about resources, I'm going to plug my book because I really like it. And I think it explains it well for the average person. If you wanted to work with me, you need to go through a whole screening process, which I go into a lot more in the first webinar. And I also recommend materials by my teacher, Isadora Laker. There are other websites and teachers as well. I'm basically loyal to Isadora, and she is one of the best teachers on the planet. Not that there aren't other good ones too. And other resources. These briefly, so Ayurveda, there's one book that's like a lifelong Bible for Ayurveda. It gives you a questionnaire, tells you your body type, and tells you a lifestyle thing that you can be working on the rest of your life. And that's called Perfect Health by Deepak Chopra. It's a brilliant book. There's a website called Banyan Botanicals, lots of information. They have products as well. Naturopathic medicine where you are, look up your local ND organization for referrals, and also always say screen for a good match. You should love your practitioners. You should feel cared for. You should feel like they're competent, and then you can relax into their hands. Websites for natural medicine, Dr. Mercola, top in the world, Dr. Weil. Also for myself, we do the consults as well as the healing stays. Then we go back to Rebecca. We have a few minutes left for questions, and we can go over if people want. I hope I didn't go too quickly, and I know that's a lot of information. And when I started to prepare, I thought, maybe I should have broken those down into 3 different webinars, but you can tell me how that was.
Thanks so much, Catherine. That was great. Yeah, I was writing notes down like crazy as you were going through stuff. We've got questions that have been put into the chat window, so I'll basically go through those, and then we can add in any other additional questions that people have. And people, if you feel like you would like to type something into the chat window right now, go ahead. So let's just go through them in order. The first one was really from me, and basically it was, if allergies are a hanging healing, then does that mean if we're having allergic symptoms, we should just ride them out and they're going to go away?
No. A hanging healing means that we keep relapsing into the shock phase. It means that we need to be aware. There's several things we need to do when there's a hanging healing or any kind of allergy. So we need to be aware, if possible, of what the shock is. What's the issue? Where did it start in our lives? Again, I want to be honest here. Sometimes that's really difficult. So you need to be aware that there is some kind of emotional triggering going on and work on general emotional healing. That's that part. And then to do the physical strengthening and detoxifying will also help with hanging healing. The stronger we feel, the healthier we feel, the stronger we also are emotionally.
Okay. And then just a follow up on that. When we're talking about allergies here, are we talking about food allergies or environmental allergies, or specifically, I've got a really bad allergy to wasp stings all of a sudden. Would that all fall into the same category?
Theoretically, yes. But so in all the category, so German New Medicine, naturopathic. So what I would say, if you've suddenly become allergic to wasp stings, that's, either there's been a shock about a sting that now your body's reacting to, and or stings with that red and puffiness, that tends to be a liver symptom and an adrenal symptom. So low adrenals, the body's just not handling that toxin very well. So the body could be too congested, and so it takes longer to deal with an extra piece of congestion, that toxin from the wasp.
Okay, so if I had the wasp sting and I had this horrible allergic reaction, but since then my liver's been cleaned up and my adrenals are better, then if I were to get a wasp sting now, I may have no reaction at all.
Yes, and it's good to anticipate that, because it could be that once we have that wasp sting and have that horrible reaction, that we then expect it, that's been a shock.
And if you're expecting it, then it's going to happen.
Predisposes to having it again if we've been shocked by it.
Right. Okay. So I should still carry the EpiPen, but not really expect that I'm going to have a reaction at all.
Right. And the other thing you can use, this is totally naturopath or herbal, is plantain. It's a leaf that grows out in your front lawn, guaranteed. And you chew it up and put it on the wasp thing. And within a minute or two, the swelling pain will be gone for most people. So that's a little pearl.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. So the next one, Patricia was wondering the same thing about inflammation as opposed to allergies. Mm-hmm. If they have inflammation, is it something that you should just be riding out and it's going to go away?
If it's brief, in other words, if you've just started the inflammation and you're clear that it's the healing phase of a certain shock, and that will be dependent on where you have the inflammation. Like if it's joints, if it's a joint inflammation, for instance, then you can assume from a German medicine point of view that that's the healing phase of a devaluation. And if you know that, you can ride it out in 6 to 8 weeks. You can expect, but you have to make sure that you're not re-triggered. So you have to be aware of the kind of devaluation it is, and is it happening chronically in your life? That's the German New Medicine level. On a naturopathic level, you have to see if there's something that's going to lock that inflammation in with foods or lifestyle. And from a medical level, if you use an anti-inflammatory, you're also going to lock it in and prevent it from healing. So I hope that's a bit clearer.
Yes, that is. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay, the next one was Little Bear was mentioning that she's been really fatigued lately, but she hasn't been working out as intensely. So maybe she was healing from the stress on her body, and would that make sense?
It would absolutely make sense.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. What's your body type, Little Bear?
I am definitely Pitta, Vata, secondly.
Okay. Yeah.
I think my blood, I think it was B. I thought I had bought the book, so I went to look for it. But blood B type, I think.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I can see that you're fairly slender. So yes, too much workout would be depleting for you and would cause an underlying fatigue. And then, but doing it would be stimulating, so you override the fatigue because we get excited by,
Yeah, I do. Overriding all my life.
But you can build up to it. Like if you look at martial arts, some of the strongest people are total Vata, but they learn to use their energy. It's a different way of exercising. Yeah, or Pitta, you're slender Pitta. So Pitta, Vata, both types can get depleted quite more easily than the Kapha types. But you can learn to exercise quite intensively using energy, using pacing, and strengthening yourself, going slower. You can still get to quite a high level. You just have to be aware of your body and monitor it.
Well, I booked a session with you
Oh,
August.
great. Okay, good. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
The next little comment here was about handedness that awakened bear.
Right.
Yeah. So what could you had mentioned it, but could you maybe just expand a little bit on the handedness part?
Yes. So Dr. Hammer discovered that when we have symptoms just on one side of the body, that they usually relate to a certain type of relationship, I guess. So our dominant side, whether right or left, relates to, they call it partner side, but it's actually anybody that we're close to, except for mother and children. Symptoms related to mother and children show up on the non-dominant side. So for instance, I had a huge blowout with one of my kids once. It shocked me to pieces. I was just flabbergasted, and it was a hearing conflict. And when I got over it, I had an ear infection on my left side because it's my non-dominant side. It was a huge healing. I had pus pouring out of my ear for like 2 weeks. So there's an example. I have lots of stories, but I'll just leave it at that. Is that clear?
Yeah, that's really interesting. It was
Yeah.
me about the handedness because I'm a lefty, and
Okay.
but it's cool. I actually have a blocked ear I've had for a while. I'm going to get it irrigated. Should I not? Should I wait to ride it out?
No, a blocked ear, should be irrigated. You want that cleared. It's something, it could get stuck.
It's been like that for a while, and literally a mosquito
would-
flew in there and it's stuck.
Yeah, no, I would irrigate that. Yeah. It's not fun.
And I
You
live
wouldn't be able to hear.
and I live with my mother, so that's my right side, but I'm lefty, so the right would indicate my mother.
Yeah.
It's amazing living with her. It's been a beautiful healing journey, actually. So this is interesting. Cool.
Yes. Lovely. I love your name, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next one was Patricia just was curious about the migraine part that you've been
Right.
mentioning.
Okay. So the migraine, I wouldn't know it off the top of my head without looking at notes, can relate to the healing phase of several new brain issues. And I think identity, I can't remember all of them. But what happens is that we get triggered by a track related to, because migraines, as I said, can be a number of different shocks. So we get triggered by that shock. And then when we come out of the trigger, the brain healing that happens would be called a migraine.
That's interesting.
Does that mean you should just write it out?
Actually, migraine sufferers don't often have a choice, but I
was going to say that. And as I got older adult, they became longer, like months and months and months long. It's harder to write out a months and months long.
Now, I have found that there hasn't been a migraine. There's only been, actually, that to be honest, there was only one migraine that we couldn't treat. And we treated it before I knew German New Medicine with liver work and structural work. And all of them healed. We got people off their drugs and not having migraines anymore.
Interesting.
Now, adding German New Medicine, now the longer somebody has had something, and that's anything, the longer it takes to heal. So,
okay.
With younger people, I've seen, I've adjusted their necks when I used to do that. I don't do that anymore. I've had an instant cure of migraines, but it was a young person. Although an older person also might have that because it just gets rid of that irritation.
Yeah, I'm always looking for different things. They've improved greatly over the last couple of years as I peel back the onion, as we say. So interesting. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Just on that, the migraine piece, then you're saying that to do a liver detox for it?
I have to assess the person.
Oh, I see. So it's not like every migraine's not the same. Okay.
Yeah, I would say I've done lots of liver detoxes. They help, but I would love the spontaneous kind of but I get big jumps in improvements over the years. So I'm always looking for what's the next thing that could help
Yeah,
me bigger improvement.
I have things like that too.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I had another question that Michael sent it just to me privately, but I think he meant to send it to everybody. But thoughts on water, artesian water, soft or dry fasts? Any thoughts on any of those pieces?
Oh, that's a good question, because water, I've explored water and feel like I just tipped the iceberg. Because when I was my original intent about exploring water was, I'm going to find the best water in the world, and that's what I'm going to recommend to people. And so then I found out about a certain water purifier which seemed to have it all. They had magnetic, they had energy, they had certain rocks which mineralized it. And I thought, here's the ultimate water purifier. And I bought it, and then I said, I'm going to muscle test everybody and see. So first of all, my pets didn't touch it, and only a few people tested positive for it. And then I realized that people need different kinds of water. So I had a hip problem for a long time, and I was working with German new medicine and chiropractic, and I finally went to Pierre LaRouche, who's an awesome osteopath, amongst many others in our group. And he said, you're just dehydrated and you're not drinking the right kind of water, and put me on distilled water. And I was even using a cane all winter 2 years ago. Now I have no hip pain anymore. And I now only drink distilled water. So I actually I had somebody come in with 17 different bottles of water. She went and bought, because I told her about this experience, and she went and bought 17 different kinds of mineral water and distilled. She only tested positive for 2. So generally I start with, okay, just drink the best water you can afford or that's around, but then you can really fine tune from that. It's very, very interesting.
So if you could learn to muscle test yourself, you could just go into the store and pick up every bottle of water and muscle test it and see which one should I get?
Somebody was telling me that you can muscle test by holding something to your chest and then standing really straight, and then know if you're swaying forwards or backwards. But
I use this sway test all the time, yeah.
I think you really have to learn that, though, because we're very biased. And so we can of course manipulate our own reactions unconsciously. So I don't really trust muscle testing myself, or the pendulum, anything that I'm doing myself that I can control. Oh, I'm a bit suspicious.
Right. If I use a pendulum, I like you can do a test where you can get somebody else to tell you what it's doing, and you keep your eyes closed.
Oh, cool.
Because that way you know you're not cheating it.
I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't have any more information on water. I feel like I just know a tiny bit of a huge topic. Yeah.
Yeah. Michael, did you have anything else on the waterfront that you wanted to check in on?
So like reverse osmosis, is that, I mean, compared to
generally good.
Yeah.
Generally good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Okay,
too.
and then just one more quick one coming back onto the migraine piece. Indira was just wondering about headaches or migraines before menstruation.
Yes. Yes. So that's a liver symptom. And Ilsidora often tells me that it could be a shock about getting pregnant or not.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's usually after, anyways.
That's interesting. Sorry, you were going to say that's usually after
we start bleeding. So, oh, there's this relief, this healing, or we're not pregnant. So it could, but somehow related to that, to pregnancy and periods and shocks.
Okay. Indira, did you have anything else you want to follow up there on that?
No, that's good. The liver piece resonates, and yeah, like I'll sit with that pregnancy part. If there's anything that pops up afterwards, we'll find out. Thank you.
I was going to type it in, but can I just ask another question unless you had another
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
Rebecca?
Go right ahead. That's all.
Something like, fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, where it's a big systemic kind of reactions happening in the body. How does that kind of show up?
Well, in German New Medicine, chronic fatigue can be two general things. And again, it can be a lot more complicated. So I'm going to simplify.
Okay.
It can be a hanging healing where the person just doesn't get out from under something, doesn't get into the higher energy part of healing, just keeps getting triggered. It can also be an active state of low adrenals, which respond to not following our path, which is very interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah. And then fibromyalgia tends to be a lot of devaluation.
Okay.
And I've had really good results with fibromyalgia.
Okay.
Just
Cool.
doing all of things in with all of these tools.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, we have another one from Anne Louise.
Okay.
How does a person get out of a hanging healing if they're stuck in it?
That's the $20 million question.
Right.
Because sometimes, honestly, sometimes people can't. And in the first webinar, I spoke about in research, the biggest factor in health is actually money. And I spoke about people who don't have resources to eat well, to see practitioners, to have any kind of stress relief. And realistically, sometimes those people can't get out of their hanging healing. Some people are in abusive or stressful situations that they don't have the strength to get out of. And so one has to go spiritual for that and just say, okay, well, this lifetime is, easy for us to say if we're not in that, right? So I think that I mentioned this in the first webinar. I think collectively, we need to create a more balanced society, and there are a lot of people working towards that. So that's my hopeful part when I think of that, which makes me very sad. But how can you do it if you have the resources? Basically, using German New Medicine, you do the emotional work to identify the shock and to resolve it. And physically, you do the lifestyle and diet work and supplements to strengthen yourself so you're more resilient. So you move forward. And spiritually, to include joy in your life, because that infuses everything with optimism.
And Louise, does that answer your question?
Okay, my microphone is at the other end of the screen. Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, it's good.
Okay.
Nice to see some people. they show up when they're speaking, so good.
No, you must be on speaker view instead of on some gallery view.
Yes,
but, oh well, we can't figure out how to change you.
We'll figure that out next time.
Well, if there's nothing else, I think this was really great. And maybe we'll just do a little short sound piece again just to close.
Oh, great. Yes.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just basically do the same thing as we did last time. I'll just take my headset. And can everybody hear me?
I'm just going to mention one more thing before ending on this, that we'll be giving more webinars. So if you want to sign up to our website, you'll get the information in the newsletters.
Sounds good. Thanks, Catherine. All right, everybody. Thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
Blessings and love to all. Have a good night.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was lovely. Thank
Really
you.
fun.
Thank you, Catherine, so much for your wisdom and knowledge.
Thanks, Patricia. Thanks for yours too.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Catherine. It was really good
Thanks, Anne Louise.
presentation.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Hey, hi. Thanks too.
Thanks, ladies. Much, much appreciated.
Hey, Indira.
Can't wait to meet you, Catherine. I'm really good friends with somebody who built some stuff over there, Andrew.
Good. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
Oh, that's fun.
yeah. So great. Meet
Yeah.
you soon. Bye.
Look forward. Bye.